shit.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
As the Supreme Court became more conservative over the time that I served as a judge, I just found that my views in terms of what I thought the right outcomes in a lot of the key cases they're just at odds with the direction that the Supreme Court was heading in. And that's fine. I mean, the lower court judges, you're not going to be in a position where you have a Supreme Court that's always handing down decisions with which you are in 100% agreement. And it's nonetheless your job as a lower court judge to faithfully follow and apply those decisions, whether you agree with them or not, right? And I accepted that as part of the oath when I took the job. But when Brune and Dobbs came down, those were just such jolts, at least in my mind, to the direction that the court had been going in, especially the decision to overrule Roe, and the really pretty dramatic transformation of Second Amendment law that occurred in Brune. Those, I don't know, that had a real impact on on my thinking about, is this something that I still want to do?
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Paul Watford, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, I think we first kind of met actually maybe about a year before you left the bench, and we've never met in person. This is the closest that we've gotten in real life, but I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, and I think that there's a lot of information that you're going to be able to impart to our audience. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, so what I like to do, I don't give long bios. People can Google you if they want to learn more, but I will give our audience a brief outline of your career, and you can let me know if what I missed or if I say anything that's incorrect. But Paul attended Berkeley, UC Berkeley undergrad. And then went to UCLA Law School, where he was the editor of the Law Review. And after UCLA clerked for the Ninth Circuit, and then clerked for the U.S. Supreme Court for the Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg for 4 years. After that, you joined Munger for a very short stint as an associate, and then went to become a AUSA for the Central District, after where you did several trials, and then joined Sidley for a brief stint, and then returned to Munger, where you made partner in 2003. And then was appointed by President Barack Obama to the Ninth Circuit as a judge, and you remained there for 11 years, and recently left the court, which I find very interesting, to go back into private practice with Wilson Sonsini as a partner, a litigation partner. So what did I miss, Paul?
You didn't miss anything. That covers it.
Yay! So we don't have to talk about that stuff anymore. Let's get to the interesting stuff. So one of the things that when I was doing a little bit of research about you that I didn't find is like where you're from, where you grew up, any of that stuff. And I like to the extent that you're willing to do it, I like to have guests share with our audience, like, where you're from, how you grew up, what your child upbringing was like, who supported you, how did you even, like have the courage and to be able to do all the things that you've done, and did that have anything to do with your upbringing?
Yeah, sure. Well, I can start by just answering the first part of the question, which is where did I grow up? I grew up
Hmm.
down in Orange County, here in Southern California. I was born in Garden Grove. We first lived in Santa Ana, moved to Irvine, and then my parents bought their first house together in the, I don't know, it must have been the mid to late 70s in Laguna Beach, of all
Mm,
places.
wow.
So a little bit of background. My mother is white, my dad is black.
Hmm.
And I think my dad was always quite hesitant about having us move to a community like Laguna Beach that was overwhelmingly white. There were very few minorities there. But I think my mom persuaded him that they had found a good deal on a house. And so anyway, that's where we moved when I was in, I guess I must have been in third or fourth grade. And I went through public schools in Laguna Beach, including Laguna Beach High School. I grew up with one full sister. She's 2.5 years younger than me. Then I have three half siblings who I'm not as close with, but was in touch with during my
Hmm.
growing up years. So I don't know. Yeah, ask me anything you want about that period, but that's the short of in terms of where I grew up.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, did you how was that being, because obviously you're mixed race, but you're visibly black. So,
Yep.
how was that? Did you encounter stereotypes or problems in Orange County?
Oh, for sure. Yes. I mean, not, well, I should qualify that. I mean, there was not a whole lot of overt racism, certainly not, anything close to what our prior generations faced.
Hmm.
But yes, I think there certainly were a lot of stereotypes that people had about what folks, who look like us, are supposed to be like. A lot of just I would chalk it up to thinking of my classmates, just a lot of insensitivity, really,
Hmm.
to just making comments that were incredibly insulting and hurtful, but maybe the people just didn't even realize it. They're just ignorant and not in tune at all with what it's like to be a minority and in a predominantly white environment. But I would say on the whole, Laguna Beach was a pretty liberal place on the whole. So
Hmm.
I can't say I encountered a whole lot of just overtly racist people. I will share one tiny little anecdote that just for
Okay.
whatever reason has stuck in my mind though. I remember I was with my mom and my sister, and we were just walking down the street. We were going back to our car, and this white man kind of got in my mom's face and just with this really hateful expression looked at her and said, "Are those yours?" Gesturing to me and my sister. And we were just like, we were really young. We had no idea. But it was clear that he was just completely disgusted with the fact that obviously my mom had kids with a black man. And,
Hmm.
he I don't know what else he said to her, but I remember she kind of stepped in between us and the guy because she was just not certain, was this guy going to, attack us or her or something? It was just a weird experience, but there wasn't a whole lot of that kind of just overt racism that we confronted.
Hmm.
I'm sure it was tougher on my parents,
Yeah.
as a mixed race couple in that environment. I'm sure they got, a lot of, I don't know. I have not talked to them about that, but I do remember a couple of occasions when we would go out as a family together, to go to a restaurant or something and just, always wondering why are people looking at us so strangely?
So that's interesting. You've never talked to your parents about their experience being a mixed race couple?
No, not at least in terms of, how did you deal with, the rest of society and how you were perceived and the like. I have not had that conversation with them at all.
But I guess it's not that unusual because as parents, you're always trying to protect your kids, right? You're trying to
Mhm.
to shield them from, the ugliness of society, until they actually have to face it. So I guess that's probably, what was happening in your family.
Yeah, yeah, I suspect that's right.
So what about the teachers? Because I've read about folks and I've talked to folks who've said that there were teachers in their lives who told them that, they couldn't do something or they weren't going to be able to do something, because of, you know, basically because they were racist or just didn't have the lived experience to deal with someone like you. What kind of experience did you have educationally and with your teachers? Were they supportive?
Yes, I was really lucky in that respect because you're right. I mean, I did not have any teachers that I can remember who, um, were at least overtly racist in the sense of trying to tell me that, I couldn't do something or I wasn't good enough for this or that. I had teachers on the whole who were incredibly supportive. I remember in particular my 10th grade English teacher. Was probably one of the most influential teachers I had as a high school student. I mean, she was just a fantastic, teacher, just in terms of her ability to convey knowledge, but also just to encourage me to develop my writing skills. I think she thought that I was a good writer, or at least had promise, and so she really
Hmm.
encouraged me to work on my writing, and of course that ended up being really important as a lawyer later on.
Right.
So I feel really lucky that I had such supportive teachers. I guess the what I will say, not to skip ahead too much, but Laguna Beach is a fairly affluent place. It was less so back then, to be honest, but
Hmm.
it's still, I mean, a lot of well-off people, but
Yeah,
the
there's wealth down there.
yeah, yeah. I'm just saying back in the 70s, early 80s, it wasn't quite the Newport Beach. That was always the really rich people lived in Newport Beach. Now,
Hmm.
now of course it's just the same. But the public schools that I attended, I can't say that they were. I mean, they were good, but not great. And I realized that when I was in college. I remember in particular. I did go to Berkeley as an undergrad, but for my fall semester of my junior year, I spent it at Georgetown,
Mm.
where a lot more of the students had gone to,
Private schools.
private schools, exactly.
Hmm.
And just comparing the education they had
Hmm.
to what I had, I mean, they were leagues ahead in terms
Hmm.
of just what they had read, the languages they had studied, you know, so comparing that to the education I had in Laguna, it was not the kind of 5-star education, but probably 3.5, 4 stars. And as I said, I was lucky because the teachers were so supportive.
Well, I have a story about that. So I grew up in Compton. Both my parents taught in the Compton School District, and so I grew up in Compton. I went to Compton Public School, Dominguez High School, and was an honor student and all that, and actually went to USC early when I was 16. And I remember the first class, you're talking about writing and being prepared. The first class that I had was a big lecture class, and you had to do the exam in a blue book.
Hmm.
And I had never heard of a blue book. I had never used a blue book. I had no idea what you were supposed to do. That was the first time I think I ever got a C in my life, and I went to the professor and said, "What's wrong? I knew the stuff." And he was like, "Yeah, but you only, like, wrote on one page in the blue book." And it was like, I was like, "Yeah, but I said what I was supposed to say." So, I say all this to say that, 1, preparation it's not necessarily that you don't have the intellect, but if you don't
Mhm.
have the exposure or the experience, then there's a lot of catching up to do, right?
Right.
And I was like, oh wow, so you just wanted me to like wax, just fill up this blue book, as opposed to saying, getting the answers. And it took me a while to figure out what writing really was. And so, yeah, writing is a
Mhm.
skill that, if you can write well, you can do well.
Yeah.
So yeah. So okay, so you graduate from public high school and you go to Berkeley undergrad. And how did you decide you wanted to go to law school? Are there other lawyers in your family, or how did you make that decision?
Sure. So I did not know when I was at Berkeley that I would ultimately go to law school. Although I will say that my dad, pretty much from the time I was a little kid, was pushing me to go to law school. That was always
Interesting.
and he had himself attended UCLA Law School
Oh,
back when he was in his early mid 20s. And he had finished his first year there, and then my mom got pregnant with me. And so
okay.
my dad said, I'm just going to take a year off and, try to get the family finances in order, and then I'll go back and finish my degree at UCLA. And he never did. He didn't finish his law degree. But he always, I just remember from the earliest, time when I was a young kid, he was always kind of pushing me to go to law school. I could tell that that's what he wanted me to do. And probably just being a rebellious teenager, I was, sort of saying, no, I don't want to go to law school. I want to do something
Right.
else. So as an undergrad, my ambition was to become a high school history teacher, actually. And
Okay.
that is what I had planned to do. I worked for 2 years after I graduated, and I could not find a job initially. I was a history major at Berkeley. I could not find a job after I graduated, and I just was going to the sort of job board, that they posted at the
Hmm.
school, and I saw an opening for a position at the lawyer referral service of the San Francisco County Bar Association.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know what that was, but it was, a job that
A
was
job.
available, and I got
Right.
hired. And our job basically was just to take calls from people. It was just, a service to the public that the county bar provided. And people would just call and say, I have this legal problem. Can you help me find a lawyer? And so our
Hmm.
job was to interview the people, find out what kinds of legal needs they had. And then we had a roster of attorneys who had agreed to take referrals in certain areas. And so we would then get off the phone with the person who would call the lawyer and see if we could arrange for that lawyer to do an initial consultation. So, I had a little bit of exposure to lawyers through that job. And then I knew one lawyer who was my dad's best friend. He was a criminal defense lawyer at the time. Milton Grimes is his name.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, he's quite well known in some circles. But he had he's basically a sole practitioner back when I was a kid, doing criminal defense work. And so during the summers, I would often go and watch his trials, and he would just sort of bring me in as part of the legal team. I remember, after trial, we would go back to his office, and he would, I could sit there as they were asked me my opinions about, how I thought this witness or that's, this strategic move would go down. And it was just fun. I mean, he was just a great mentor in my life. And, so he was the only lawyer that I knew growing up.
Hmm.
And then, as I said, I had this exposure to lawyers at the job I had, but it was really my wife who pushed me to apply to law school. I was already going through the process of applying to get I think it was like a 1 year's master's degree in
Hmm.
education that you needed to get a teaching certificate. That again, that's what I was focused on. So, but my wife said you should apply to law school at the same time. There's no reason not to. You might decide that that's what you want to do instead. And so I took both the GRE and the LSAT at the same time, basically, and
Hmm.
submitted the applications. And I got into to UCLA for law school, and my wife was really the one who persuaded me that that was the right thing to do. And what she said is, look, if you ultimately want to be a teacher, you can still do that even with a law degree. But if you get the law degree, you'll at least have a lot more options.
Smart lady.
Yes, she was quite persuasive in that. And I think that's what tipped me over the edge. And of course, it was the absolute right decision. I ended up loving law school. It was one of the best decisions I made. And so I give all of the credit to her and to my dad as well for always having that, planting that seed and pushing me toward in that direction from the time I was a kid.
Well, thank her for us. And so you got married right out of undergrad?
Yes. I graduated in, May or June, whatever it was, and got married in August of that same year.
Wow. So you guys were at school together, I take it.
Yeah, I met her. In fact, I met my wife at Berkeley as a freshman. She was a sophomore, so she was a year ahead of me.
Okay, okay, girl. All right, so you clerked with the Ninth Circuit. I will tell you that I interned with the Ninth Circuit for Harry Pragerson
Yes.
when I was at Berkeley. So I have stories that I like to tell about that experience. But what was that when you kind of got the bug for thinking, when did you realize that maybe you wanted to be a judge?
Yeah, so no, I would say that was much later. When I clerked, I certainly thought that both of the judges for whom I clerked, I thought they had one of the best jobs in the world. But it was, I don't even know how to put it. It just seemed so far beyond anything that I could ever hope to achieve. I had no idea how one even became a federal judge, especially. And, I didn't know any politicians. I didn't know senators. I certainly didn't know any presidents. So the thought of ever being appointed a federal judge was pretty remote at that time. I was more focused just on trying to become a lawyer and being a litigator. That I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't know much beyond that.
So, and then of course, obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It doesn't get any more prestigious than that. What was that like?
It was an amazing experience. I mean, I was so incredibly lucky that she was willing to hire me. I clerked for her during her third term on the court, so she was relatively new. She had been a judge a long time on the DC circuit before then, but she was relatively new as a Supreme Court justice, and she was not the celebrity figure she later, she became in her later life. She was a very quiet, introverted judge. She was, just keeping her head down, doing great work on the Supreme Court. She was well known, as a litigator for women's rights before she ever became a judge, and she, would have been one of the giants of the law even if she had never gone on the bench. But I would say, the term when I clerked for her, she was still relatively anonymous. I mean, I don't.
Okay.
I remember we went out on a couple of occasions with her to the public functions, and it wasn't like she was being mobbed, by crowds trying to take selfies, which is what happened later when I would go out with her. She just couldn't go anywhere without, being surrounded by people who wanted to have their picture taken with her. But it was a fantastic experience. Justice Ginsburg was, again, an incredibly influential mentor, a great teacher, someone who cared a lot about her clerks. She wanted to make sure that we, got all that we could out of the year that we spent in her chambers. So she spent a lot of time with us working on our writing, and she was a very meticulous editor herself, and a really skilled writer. But what I especially liked about what she would do is that, we would prepare first drafts of all the opinions. She would then edit them in pencil on paper and give the drafts back to us. And oftentimes she would sit down with us and just explain why she made this change or why she made that change, why she thought, the way we had phrased this wasn't quite precise enough, or, it needed clarifying or whatever it was. And, through osmosis, you just learned so much from that kind of process when a really good writer is willing to spend that kind of time with you. So It was one of the highlights, obviously, of my legal career to spend a year in her chambers.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that there should be term limits on the Supreme Court justices?
Well, yeah, if you had asked me that even 10, 15 years ago, I probably would have said absolutely not. Now I find myself much more on the fence. And it's, yeah, I mean, that's a complicated subject. We could spend the rest of our time talking about that. I guess the only thing I would say is that the reason I find myself more inclined to think that that would be a good idea is just because the confirmation process now for Supreme Court justices seems so dysfunctional and so broken. But my main concern is that I don't know that imposing term limits would solve the problem. What people who have been advocating for imposing term limits say is that, well, it would regularize the appointments process, and every president would get 2 appointments, during I think that's how it works out, during a typical 4-year term. But the problem is that if the president and the Senate are of opposite parties, there would not necessarily be a confirmation.
Right, which we experienced, though.
Exactly. Right. So I don't know that ultimately it solves any problems. That's my main concern. But on the whole, the proposal to have, let's say, an 18-year term limit, I don't think that's a terrible idea in concept. That's a nice long tenure to have as a judge, especially as a judge on the Supreme Court, where a lot of, all but Justice Kagan, I think, were previously served as federal judges before that. So in any event, I'm more open to it than I was before, but I'm not convinced that that would be the golden ticket to solve all of the problems that people think it might.
Well, I guess that the biggest problem, as I see it, is that it's just become so politicized, right? You used to feel that justice, was just that. It is like it didn't matter what party or politics or anything like that, and that seems to have changed. And it seems to me there needs to be some kind of change, or something has to happen, because we can't keep going the way we're going.
Yeah, I agree. I think unfortunately it has damaged the public's perception of the Supreme Court itself in some respects. So yeah, I agree with you. I hope that some kind of bipartisan solution can be put together where both parties just say, you know what, we've been blaming each other for the dysfunction, and it's been tit for tat, but let's just kind of start from a clean slate and come up with a system that's actually rational and works for the country going forward.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
So you say, I'm not anybody who knows politicians, and I'm not anybody who knows folks. And of course, I certainly don't know a president. And then you get appointed by Barack Obama to the Ninth Circuit. So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, so it was, a lot by happenstance, really. The key person in making that come about was one of my co-clerks, actually, with Justice Ginsburg. His name is Phil Weiser. He's now the Attorney General of Colorado. He, back in 2010, 2011, he had taken a leave from his regular job at the time, which was being a law professor at the University of Colorado. He joined the Obama administration during President Obama's first term. And I remember this distinctly. He sent me an email toward the end of, I think it was 2010. And he said, Paul, I'm getting ready to wrap up my leave of absence from the law school, and I'm getting ready to go back. But I've gotten to know the person in the White House counsel's office who is responsible for doing the vetting for President Obama's judicial nominees. If you ever had an interest in becoming a federal judge, why don't you send me your resume and I'll pass it on to her? Who knows what might come of that. And I remember sitting down and, writing back to him and attaching my resumes, thinking, yeah, whatever, nothing's going to come of this. But a few weeks later, he got in touch with me and said, hey, I passed on your resume to the person, and she expressed interest in potentially meeting you. So if you ever happen to be in DC, in the next few months, why don't you let me know, and I'll try to set up a coffee or something so you could meet this person. And sure enough, I let him know I was going to be in DC. I think it was early 2011, and he arranged a meeting with someone in the White House counsel's office, and that's basically how it happened. I had no other contacts with anyone in the Obama administration. Certainly, no one close to the president who would be in a position to recommend me for a federal judgeship. So it just went from there.
Well, and that's incredible, but I think it's a testament to relationships, right? And
Yep.
uh, I firmly believe in relationships and kind of paying it forward and always trying to connect people and think about who should know whom and that kind of thing. Um, you know, do you have a position on how important relationships is? Because I think that's something that folks in our audience, would love to understand. How do you go about making relationships and keeping them and how important, obviously it's been important, but in other ways, I'm sure it's been important for you.
Yeah. I mean, no question. Both in terms of just having mentors, right? Those kind of
Right.
mentor-mentee relationships are incredibly important. And I've mentioned a couple of the key figures in my life who've been important in that respect. But also just relationships with your peers, right? Especially when you're in law school or early in your career, you want to have as broad a network of people that and can draw on for support, and you're in a position perhaps to help them when they're trying to make a career move or something. They might become aware of an opportunity. Just as I said with Phil, I don't think we had never talked about my becoming a federal judge. I don't think he necessarily assumed that that's something that I wanted to do, but he was in a position where he could help make that happen. And I'm just so grateful that he reached out to me at that particular moment in time. But yeah, to me, that's a perfect example of a relationship that that went back. I don't know how long we had known each other then, but we were good friends. We got to be good friends during the clerkship. Had stayed in touch, as we went our separate ways during our legal careers, and then. Yeah, he was the perfect person to open that door for me, and there's no question in my mind I would never have become a federal judge had he not sent me that email, right, and started that process.
Wow. So that kind of leads us to your going back into private practice, because I remember talking to you and saying, isn't this a position for life? Like, aren't you like hooked up for life? Why, what would possess you to do that? And we laughed about it, but can you share with us what your thought process was?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when I took the job and really through most of my time on the Ninth Circuit, I had the same mindset that this is a lifetime appointment. I'm going to do this for the rest of my career. And, I didn't know of very many federal judges who had stepped down before retirement age. Many of the judges in our court, served into their 80s and 90s, and still are, right? I mean, still very productive. So that is definitely the life that I envisioned for myself when I was first appointed. The turning point came, a couple of terms ago, a couple of Supreme Court terms ago, when Dobbs and Bruen were handed down, and I think that's what first caused me to start to question whether I wanted to spend the rest of my life potentially on the bench. Those two decisions in particular just, let me just back up and say that, as the Supreme Court became more conservative over the time that I served as a judge, I just found that my views in terms of what I thought the right outcomes in a lot of the key cases they're just at odds with the direction that the Supreme Court was heading in. And that's fine. I mean, the lower court judges, you're not going to be in a position where you have a Supreme Court that's always handing down decisions with which you are in 100% agreement. And it's not nonetheless your job as a lower court judge to faithfully follow and apply those decisions, whether you agree with them or not, right? And I accepted that as part of the oath when I took the job. But when Brune and Dobbs came down, those were just such jolts, at least in my mind, to the direction that the court had been going in, especially the decision to overrule Roe, and the really pretty dramatic transformation of Second Amendment law that occurred in Brune. Those, I don't know, that had a real impact on on my thinking about, is this something that I still want to do? And part of that was, I think, because at the time that both of those decisions came down, I had on my docket then cases involving abortion and gun rights that were obviously going to be affected by what the Supreme Court had just held. And what dawned on me then was that probably for the rest of my time as a federal judge, I'm going to be serving on a court that's, I'm going to be serving under a Supreme Court that's going to be issuing decisions like these that I'm just going to fundamentally disagree with. And as I said a minute ago, it's nonetheless going to be my job to
follow
apply
the
those
precedent,
decisions.
right?
Exactly.
Wow.
And often, have to issue rulings and write opinions that reach what I view as the wrong outcomes in very, extremely important areas of the law. And so that's what really caused me to start to have doubts about whether I wanted to stay on the bench.
Wow, that's deep because I hadn't thought about it like that. So if you have a case like an abortion case and Roe has been overturned and you write the opinion upholding the precedent that has just come down, can you still write it in a way that it's like, I'm doing this, but I wish I didn't have to do this? Or do you have to just buy into it hook, line, and sinker?
Well, yeah, you certainly can, I think, as a judge, express your views that I'm doing this reluctantly. I'm bound to follow what a higher court has told me to do, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. You certainly can say that, and judges often do in separate writings. You can file a concurrence that says, I'm going along with this result, even though I disagree with it, only because binding precedent compels me to. Judges do that all the time. But what you can't do, in my view, is basically engage in civil disobedience, right? I mean, when you take the oath of office, you basically have to put aside your own personal views. And I don't mean personal views in terms of like political views. I just mean like your personal judicial philosophy. It really becomes irrelevant if there is an on-point Supreme Court decision that tells you the outcome has to be X or the reason you have to follow is Y. I think it's your obligation as a lower court judge to faithfully follow and apply those decisions, whether you agree with them or not. Some of my colleagues on the Ninth Circuit, I remember Judge Reinhardt in particular, for example. He thought that it was okay to push back, at least around the margins at Supreme Court precedent that you disagreed with, and he was famous for saying they can't catch them all. By which he meant,
I can tell you that Harry Pregerson was like that too.
Exactly.
Yep. Absolutely, because we had a death penalty case. And they were sitting on bonk, and he had each of us do the research, how should this go? And he had us present to him what the law was and how it should go, and all of us said, unfortunately, this guy's got to get the death penalty. This is pretty clear. And I remember him saying, which one of you wants to pull the switch? And we all looked at each other and said, we'll go look at it again. So that's when I realized I was not going to be a litigator. I could not do that. But so yeah, I did experience that, but I had, because that was my only experience, I hadn't thought about the fact that from the other perspective, right? Because he didn't want to put anybody to death, right?
Right.
But from your with the current Supreme Court, the idea that you would have to do some of the things based on this precedent that they're now setting, I can see how that would be a horrible position to be in.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly as I said, it just sort of dawned on me that although these two decisions were the focus, there were just going to be a whole series of decisions going forward in really all of the, not all, but most of the hot button areas of the law that, people are going to have the strongest feelings about. My views were just going to be at odds with those of the current Supreme Court. And, listen, I had done exactly what you were describing, exactly what we were just talking about before. In plenty of cases, during my time on the court, there were, I can think of, easily a dozen really hard cases in which I cast votes that were against what I thought the proper interpretation of the law should be. But nonetheless, as you were describing when you had the conversation with Judge Ferguson, the law was clear. There really wasn't any ambiguity, and either because there was a Supreme Court decision on point, or maybe there was a statute that Congress had passed that had been interpreted in a certain way. It really compelled you to reach a result that was just fundamentally what I thought was fundamentally wrong. But I nonetheless thought it's my job as a judge to put those views aside and to follow the dictates of the law. And I'm sure I guess I could have continued to do that for again the rest of my life as a federal judge, but I just started thinking that no, I'm not going to be comfortable doing that. I don't want to be complicit in issuing rulings that I think are inflicting grave injustices on people. And as I said, the gun rights and abortion rulings in particular just really kind of sharpened that thought. And I just thought, you know what? I think I could probably do something else that I would find more enjoyable than this. And so anyway, that's at least what was the catalyst for my thinking about stepping down.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So that's a great segue into private practice, going back into private practice. And you actually just used the word joy, which I love. That's my word of the year is joy. If it doesn't bring me joy, I don't want to do it. But there, I think there are a lot of folks in big law who would say, what the hell is he talking about, joy? So why don't you share with us how you're finding joy in the practice of big law?
Sure. Yeah. So, luckily it's something that I had done before. I went on the bench. I had been a litigator at Munger Tolles, and I had thoroughly enjoyed my time in private practice. I had focused mostly on appellate litigation back then. I'm doing more of a mix of trial court and appellate litigation now. But I guess what I will say, the thing that I find most enjoyable is something that I don't think I appreciated when I was a litigator, and it's something that I really only came to appreciate because I can contrast it with my life as an appellate court judge. One thing I did not realize when I took the job on the Ninth Circuit is just how isolating in some respects being a Court of Appeals judge is. There were a lot of days where the only contact I had with people in the outside world were, with my four law clerks and my judicial assistant. Just a lot of time spent reading by yourself, writing and editing by yourself. Obviously, the best part of the job is interacting with the law clerks on a daily basis. That's great, and then we have our sittings and we interact with our judicial colleagues. But on the whole, it's a fairly isolating job, and so I just say that not that it's a terrible job. I enjoyed every minute of my 11 years on the court. But one of the things that I'm really enjoying about being back in private practice is just working as part of collaborative teams. Teams of lawyers, both within the firm, the lawyers at other firms, interacting with the clients, and it's a much more, my days are much more engaged with other people. And I find that I really enjoy that. Now, I am lucky in that I am practicing at a law firm with a group of folks some of whom I've known for 30 years. We're really good friends. They're people that I love coming to the office to see and to be around. We have fun together. So that again just adds to the joy. Now, that's not to say that everything about practice in big law is all. It's not all joy.
There's still billable hours.
Exactly. You got to keep track of those billable hours, and there's stress and client demands. But on the whole, I'm just having a terrific time. I have no regrets about having stepped down. I'm really happy to be back in private practice, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun, as I said.
But let's face it, it pays a lot better than civil service does.
That is for sure. There's no question about that.
So what's going on? So we talked about the Second Amendment law and overturning Roe. Let's talk about this attack on affirmative action and DEI. Especially now that you're back in private practice. What are your thoughts? Obviously, I have my thoughts, but what are your thoughts of what's going on and why?
Yeah, well, the why, I guess I have a harder time explaining. I am a beneficiary of affirmative action, both, my admission to Berkeley and to UCLA in particular, were due just to the really robust affirmative action programs that our public universities in this state used to have. And I remember when Prop 209 was enacted, I continue to think that was absolutely the wrong policy direction to take our state. I don't know. I look at my own experience, especially, as I said, being admitted to UCLA. There was, I recall, I got admitted in the fall of 1991. And there was, even then, a lot of controversy about the school's affirmative action program. And I do remember feeling that there was, at least in the background, some measure of hostility to the fact that folks like me were there, because the view was that I wasn't qualified. I should have gone to some lower ranked school. I'd taken the place of a person who, would have been able to excel better. And I did quite well academically at UCLA.
No kidding.
I felt I was, fully qualified to be there. And I'm sure I could have gotten into another law school. But I have no doubt in my mind that all of the opportunities that came my way because I was at UCLA, those doors wouldn't have opened had I gone to another law school. And so I look back and just think, our state at that time was willing to make an investment and a commitment to diversity. That's what opened the doors, for me. And I think it's terrible that what the Supreme Court has now done is basically imposed, the Prop 209 type regime on the rest of the country. That's another one of those decisions. As I said, I would have been compelled to follow that, even though I fundamentally disagreed with it. I don't know why this is happening now. I don't have any great insight into that. But I do think the direction that our country has the turn that our country has taken with the Supreme Court's latest decision. I just think it's fundamentally the wrong direction to go in.
Well, it feels like just an attack. It's exhausting because it feels like you're personally, constantly under attack, based on something that you have no control over, which is the color of your skin, and how you were born and who you were born to. But, this is nothing new. It stands the test of time, I think. And I'll tell you that obviously, I benefited from affirmative action. A lot of people have, but I think it's not just people of color who have benefited from affirmative action.
Mhm.
People are getting in college based on who they know and how much money they have, and being helped, and any to me anybody who says that they have not received any kind of affirmative help, particularly people who are successful, are delusional.
Yeah.
It is just not true, and the idea that anybody buys into that, is unfortunate, at least, um, and delusional at best. But I am kind of one of those people who feels like, the words affirmative action have a stigma. And
Mhm.
now even DEI has a stigma, right? And
Right.
I don't care what it's called. You know, you don't call it affirmative action, don't call it DEI. I would just like for it to be fair. Just call it
Mhm.
fairness.
Yeah.
You forget the rest of that. Just treat everybody fairly, and we wouldn't have to have any kind of program.
Mhm. Yep. I completely agree.
Yeah, so that's my little soapbox there. But so what do you do for fun, Paul?
What do I do for fun? Boy, I used to play basketball. That was my one of my real passions until I tore my Achilles playing
Ah,
basketball. And yeah, so I had to give that up. Now I just, I jog and lift weights. That's not nearly as much fun. I love to read. I wish I had more time to do outside reading. I'm particularly a history and biography buff. That's not surprising, maybe given my undergraduate major. I've actually been trying to read as much as I can about artificial intelligence. I'm
ah.
fascinated by the developments that are happening in that area. I think it's going to transform society in a really fundamental way over the next
But is
10
it
years.
scary? I find it scary.
Yeah, there are definitely good reasons to be scared, but I think if if done right, I think artificial intelligence could really improve a lot of people's lives. But anyway, I mean, it's something that's coming, whether we
Whether
wanted
we're
to.
afraid of it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so and then I love spending time with my wife. We have a nice home in Pasadena is where we live. She's done an amazing job, constructing this very elaborate garden that I try to help her out in on the weekends. And
Nice. Nice.
yeah, but I mostly try to spend my free time just enjoying things with her.
Okay. So we're pretty much out of time, but I want to ask you one last question, and want to hopefully, to encourage folks who are listening to. And so that question is, what words of encouragement or advice do you have for others about embracing their authentic self?
Oh, yeah, what words of advice? I don't know that I have any brilliant insights to offer on that front. Other than I guess just to to have certainly to have the confidence in yourself. To I mean, I'm just thinking back when I was younger and just all the self-doubts I had about what I was capable of doing, and
Hmm.
just sort of underestimating, I guess, what I
Yep.
was capable of doing, right? And so just yeah, trusting that you are actually, if presented with opportunities that kind of stretch your abilities or stretch the boundaries of what you think you're capable of, feeling confident that you'll be able to rise to that challenge, because you absolutely will. That's how people who achieve all of these amazing things, that they have that reservoir of self-confidence that allows them to do that. that's what I found myself just trying to kind of look within and just kind of bolster my own sense that I'm capable of doing this, and even if there are people who are out there doubting, whether I have the ability, I'll be able to rise to the challenge. But that's really the only thing I can think of to offer in terms of advice on that front.
Well, that's that's pretty perfect. I would say, when because a lot of us face situations, everybody faces situations where they have doubts about themselves. There may be people who are discouraging you instead of encouraging you, and finding the wherewithal within, to be able to not listen to that, and just
Yep.
and believe in yourself. Because what's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, right? If you ask somebody for help and they say no, okay,
Yep.
but not doing those things is much worse than trying to do something. I think you're a perfect example of just, believing in yourself, having the courage to try things and do things, and take advantage of opportunities that are presented.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, I appreciate that. That's certainly the approach I've tried to take to just my professional career, for sure.
Well, I would encourage anybody who's looking for an appellate lawyer, anybody who's listening and they think that they could use Paul's help. He's at Wilson Sonsini, and I'm sure would love to bring in your business to the firm, because that's the other thing you got to do these days, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, uh, this has been wonderful, Paul. Thank you so much for being here to BS with me today, and thanks to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.